What's up, everyone, and welcome to our Level 9B live Q&A here with the Cannabis Training Academy. Thank you all for joining us. Tonight, we are going to have a discussion about SOPs for manufacturing with our instructor, Kevin Sorotowski. There's so much to talk about when it comes to manufacturing. This is the part of the license that I feel like is just such a sweet spot in the industry. And I think coming from Kevin, who's an expert in this space, you'll find it just as sweet, no pun intended, with all the gummies that come from manufacturing licensees. But just a bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions, the chat is open. Please feel free to drop your questions in the chat and or the Q&A box. If you want, definitely put in where you're calling from. We love to be able to tailor a lot of our conversations and questionings to helping you. As always, welcome if you are in the CTA program. Hope you are getting through those levels. If you are having any technical issues, make sure that you do reach out to our helpline within the CTA portal, and we'll make sure that we get that situated for you. And more importantly, we always like to reiterate, no matter where you are in your licensing process, all this information is just to help you better set up shop, make great decisions. So with that, we'll just get into it. I'm going to allow Kevin to introduce himself. Again, this is our Level 9B SOPs for Manufacturing Q&A. So Kevin, I'd love for you to just tell us a little bit about you, your history. We know it, but I love for students to get to know it a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. And just so you know, before I start, if you could do me a favor and promote Mike Maybach in there to a panelist, he's going to be answering a handful of the questions with me. He's my partner in our firm, and he's going to cover a few of those today. So,
Perfect.
yeah. And I'm sure he heard too the introduction thing, so I'll just start as you promote him to a panelist. Thank you too for the introduction. Hello, everybody. My name is Kevin Sorotowski. I've been in the cannabis industry for quite a long time and been across a lot of different areas of the cannabis industry. I actually started in the CBD and hemp world way before it was like a big booming thing, and kind of phased that out as the industry kind of shifted a little bit. Helped build a pretty large manufacturing company in the extraction space that you might have heard of, Precision Extraction Solutions. And so they were ultimately acquired. At the time that they were acquired, they had picked up a couple of companies, Precision Lab Society, Pure Pressure, Cascade. Again, maybe some household names you might be familiar with, but me and some of the founders of those companies decided to step down from the acquiring purchaser, Agrify, at the time, and start our own firm. And we've been doing that ever since. So we've done everything from like startup licensing, consulting, and advising to operational efficiency, and everything in between, down to equipment procurement and actually helping people get their manufacturing spaces planned for and set up. So yeah, with that being said, I've also been an operator. So a lot of them within my group, we've, been operators in various facets. So, sometimes people do things from behind a computer and sometimes people live it. We've done a little bit of both, right? And worked across the larger corporate companies and some of the small to mid-sized ones as well, and the startups. So being an operator, it's been a very good experience over those years to really understand what's real and what y'all are really facing and really help guide you through the complexities.
Thank you for that. And please, Mike, I'd love to get an intro from you as well. We on the CTA side see you always working with Kevin, but I'd love for our students to get to know you a bit as well.
Sure. Just let me close this door really quick because this fan is loud out here.
Hmm.
Yeah, so my name is Mike Mavak. I'm one of the partners in Elevated Advisory Group. Like Kevin, I've kind of been in the industry for over 10 years. I started more on the caregiver side, believe it or not, and more or less actually cultivating, and then moved into actually manufacturing equipment for extraction processes. So that was one of the brands he mentioned, Lab Society. We focused in distillation equipment and refinement equipment. Through that journey, developed a lot of different technologies, worked with a lot of different partners, and also learned a lot about compliance. And I would say that was one of our kind of bread and butters of our company, is that we would provide a lot of the documentation for companies to get through approvals. And we worked with a lot of full laboratory build outs rather than just supplying like one piece of equipment for the line. We would actually we'd outfit the entire lab, help them with process flow, SOPs, all that kind of stuff. So when this opportunity came up, Kevin obviously took the lead on making it happen, and I feel like we're a perfect fit. We actually helped write some of the UL standards in Canada, and some ISO standards as well. So, the seed document for ISO IWA 37 was, I wrote quite a bit of that, which is a lot of the safety for manufacturing cannabis in Canada and in various licensed facilities. So yeah, now we're here helping people win.
I love that. Thank you guys. And just both of those experiences. I don't think there's not a lot of people. Cannabis longevity is like, what is the slow year? Like working in cannabis for 2 years can feel like eight. So to me, that makes you guys triple OGs, in my opinion, from how long you've been here. And manufacturing, again, I feel like it's one of those places where you can easily get confused. It seems like a lot. So I really want to kind of bring it down to a simple ABC level for our students here. Just starting off with like, what are some of the essential components of a cannabis manufacturing SOP when it comes to
Yeah.
operating? What has to be in there that you think people should make sure that they pay attention to?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to take this one. So this was actually one of the, even though it's more basic, it's actually one of the longer ones. But I kind of figured out a way to really boil it down, if you will. So some of the like specifics in terms of like what I'll call like the format or the structure of the SOP are some of the obvious, right? So the title of the SOP and maybe some sort of a version or ID number, right? I really like using like a version and the date, right? So you can kind of keep track of which, well, we'll go into that with some later questions, but definitely a version, and a date that it was written, any approvals that are required for it, as well as who did approve it, right? Because somebody writing the SOP might not be the ultimate person that signs off on it, as well as, again, not necessarily maybe an essential, I would still put it on there, but a review schedule. With that, a couple other just high level ones, right? Purpose and scope, right? Like be defined, right? With what you're like, tell them what they're about to read in this SOP so they don't have to get halfway through to figure it out. Be very clear on what exactly it is dictating. As well as definitions and references to the code that it complies to. I think that's really a necessity because it helps you like remember what to keep up on, if you will, which again we'll get to in kind of later sessions. But with references to code, sometimes you may want to just be very specific if it's not wordy, putting them right there, right inside of the SOP. Also, like roles and responsibilities for who's actually going to dictate it, who's going to oversee it, right? Again, somebody might be different that's approving it versus actually facilitating it and living it on a day to day. Those are kind of the high levels. And, obviously, like that really boils down to what's the purpose and how do we track it for revisions, right? With that said, which I think we'll cover in another later section as well, but like there's definitely some individual things under different areas, if you will, like packaging and labeling, quality assurance and control, material, equipment, and safety requirements. Those definitely all have essential things, but those are specific to that SOP. So I figured you were kind of wanting to have that overall, like what makes the structure of a good SOP. So really, irrespective of those specifics, it's after those high level ones I gave you, it's the exact steps for what is being done for this specific process or product.
Yeah. And now just boiling into detail, because that's a good way to kind of put it. Like when you first want to get started, how you're writing those things. We've talked about it often for those who've been on our series, just what a standard operating procedure is. Now, again, I think of manufacturing. I also think about like how people manufacture food or other goods or other equipment. Feels like there's an extra level of attention to detail in terms of processes. And if that's true, how do you then put all of those details super clearly on documents so that your staff can also interpret?
Yeah, absolutely. This one's one of mine too. So, I kind of like to, you'll start to hear me refer to a few things in this. I'll say SOPs versus work instructions.
Mm,
Um, in an SOP, a lot of the times you're doing, well, not a lot of the times, you're mostly doing those early on, right? No matter what and where else you use them, you're doing them early on for licensing. So, at the end of the day, you're not going to know certain things. For example, you may not have the exact piece of equipment or you may not have the exact piece of software. Some are constants, like your seed to sale tracking system by the state, but some you don't know. So in that SOP, you're really kind of like writing to the people approving the license. In the work instructions, that's where I would say there's a few ways you can do that. Um, one of them is going to be having them very dependent based on that task or type of SOP. So some of them might simply be a little bit more overwhelming than more, but usually those ones will be overseen by a compliance officer or someone of that nature that, hey, that's their job responsibility, right? If they can't read these and understand and implement these at that level, maybe not the right job, right? But there's some that you can take a little bit of the fluff out. For example, how your material moves to destruction, let's say, in a certain instance, right? You could be very basic and call out it has to move from area A to area B and be destructed in that way. You don't have to tell them to take 10 steps to the left, 5 steps forward, right? You can, there's a good portion of them that just by design and being careful to take the fluff out, you can naturally not overwhelm them. But being honest, and that's what you want from us, right? We want to be real. Some of the SOPs just might be a little bit more cumbersome, or excuse me, the work instructions when you actually get there. But with the right staff, they just become regular, kind of every day for them.
Yeah. Nice. I want to kind of take a little step back because I know we're going to dive more into like just SOP building and bring that up. But just because we have you two experts here, can we talk about manufacturing, like the processes, the different types of manufacturing? What comes out of manufacturing licenses? Where do they go? What products come out? Where do they go? I know it's a big world, but if you
Mhm.
could, can you just tell us like how does manufacturing work within the cannabis supply chain? What do people, what kind of products are made? How does it all work?
Yeah. So basically, Mike, do you want to take that one?
It's up to you. You can.
Yeah, I can take it. Okay, cool. So, there's at the very start, right? Like very high level. When you look at manufacturing, there's a couple different ways to look at it. You can look at it as literally making the raw ingredients or what we would call an API, right? That's literally taking raw biomass and extracting the oil from it, or taking raw biomass, grinding it, rolling it, packaging it, right? There's like that whole entire life cycle of taking it to the final product. There's also manufacturing that's more in the New Jersey world, right? Infusion, right? So with an infusion, you're basically buying raw materials, right? You're not making the pepperonis, the cheese, and the bread and the sauce. You're buying them all and putting them together. Okay. Um, and then I would say we could talk about potentially manufacturing could also be like packaging. Some people will consider a distribution from a license type. It's different, but then there's people that will just buy a bulk final product, package it, and then send it out to the consumer, right? Or the retailer. With that said, real, in my opinion, like manufacturing, right, comes down to the first one, generating everything, creating the API. There's a few different solvents. I'm sure you've heard the buzzword solvent, right? There's a few different solvents for extraction. Those are going to consist of either hydrocarbon, ethanol, or alcohol.
Mhm.
And finally, CO2. Those are the big stainless steel cool machines you might have seen at a thing. That's what we did. We built those, right? Basically, what those are doing is those are taking the plant material, right? Whether you grew it or if you bought it in bulk, taking the plant material and literally pulling the desirables, we call, right? You'll avoid the undesirables like chlorophyll, things that make things harsh to smoke and things of that nature, and pull out the desirables, the cannabinoids, the molecules that you want, right? Um, and there's also a solventless process. So the one thing I encourage everybody to do to really understand manufacturing is like actually like read into hydrocarbon, alcohol, CO2, as well as solventless, so you understand it. A lot of people make decisions on equipment and what they're going to do based on hearsay and, oh, this is dangerous because something happened over here. Really at this point with the companies that are around and the regulations and how people are taking this seriously from a regulatory standpoint, if done right and you're on the legit licensed market, it is safe, right? So I would encourage everybody to look into those. But at the very least, a quick high level is ethanol or alcohol processing, as you may have heard. That's kind of geared a little bit more towards distillate, which is usually for distillate vapes, edibles, or infused pre-rolls. Hydrocarbon manufacturing is what you would be familiar with for more of the craft concentrates that you see on the shelf, live resin, diamonds and sauce, shatter, batter, wax, right? BHO oil, whatever. Those are traditionally coming from like a hydrocarbon process, and those are usually more the high quality craft concentrates, as well as the terpene heavy ones. CO2 is not frequently used anymore in the market, really anywhere. Some international because of some misled data or regulation, but like nothing against it, but just not really used and necessary really in the market. And then solventless is what you would consider rosin or hash, right? For lack of better words. And that's pressed solventless. So basically doesn't use any of those solvents. It's literally pressed out with heat and pressure. All have their benefits and different final effects as a smoker. I'm sure you've all consumed them and enjoyed them or know people that have. So, but yeah, that's kind of the high level of it. And then I guess the last one is there is some post refinement and post processing, we call it. Also, one of the things Lab Society, when Mike started, specialized in. But that's like, hey, after we run it through this big fancy machine, usually what we might have is crude or, machine,
Yeah.
call it. But to get it to that final customer package, sometimes you got to do different things, distill it, pull certain things out, put it in a vacuum oven to purge some of those solvents out, or various different things. So that final step would be post processing, or like post refinement.
And
I'm
an
gonna
important
take
note really quick on that is a lot of times choosing the different extraction methods, like Kevin had mentioned briefly, is based on local jurisdictions. So like in New Jersey, obviously the CRC is going to be the overarching, but each municipality might have more localized regulations where you might not be able to use butane, you might not be able to use alcohol, you might not be able to use it in the quantity that you want. So as a result, you might lean towards a different extraction method, which is really why CO2 took such a hold early in the industries, because everyone was so afraid of these solvents and explosions and all the horror stories in the news. So it's really important to understand what your actual local jurisdiction and fire department is actually looking for as well.
like I can take the section that you guys just said and like when we post what is manufacturing, like just roll clip because that's really the most concise ways I hear it. Mike, I have another question for you. Just being that you worked with so many manufacturing companies and kind of seeing it from the ground up, a lot of our students, some of them, this would be their first time looking to launch a manufacturing business or enter into this space, probably with some experience. What are some pitfalls that you notice when folks are just starting to develop their game plan to start and open a manufacturing facility? What should they like? What are landmines you've seen people literally walk into that are quite avoidable?
There's quite a few. Kevin actually answered this question, but I'll just go with it. Writing for licensing and only being vague is a really big one. Because if you go into it thinking, it was kind of like what Kevin was talking about earlier, the work instructions versus SOPs. You know,
Mhm.
for the state to get your approval, you might write exactly what they want to hear, but when you actually get that machine in the room, you need to understand how to use it. So getting actual operator training from people who are qualified, I would say, is a really big one. um, Training from not only the manufacturer, but people that are experienced in the space, because even some of the manufacturers, and I hate to say this, but during up until the 2019 days, it was really, I don't want to say the Wild West, but it was pretty crazy with extraction equipment sales and everybody trying to get into it. Since then, a lot of the players have gotten shaken out, gone out of business, gotten acquired like us, just different things. And for instance, Lab Society, there's really no support mechanisms left there aside from myself being a consultant through EAG. There's some support methods other places, but the main point there is that there's definitely some predatory equipment salespeople out there. And
Mm.
if you're not careful with who you choose to work with and you buy equipment from like a new manufacturer that just popped up, they might not have all of that, not only compliance knowledge, but also just the implementation knowledge to work with your staff in that facility. So we've seen that a lot. Um, not referencing manufacturer recommendations. Lack of maintenance is another huge one. A lot of people go into this, they might buy a used vacuum pump and not have two extra used vacuum pumps so that when that used one dies, you have one behind it. Downtime is crucial in this space, especially for a manufacturing operation when you're trying to meet deadlines and you start having actual demands from your clients. So really maintaining equipment is another huge one, and lack of ongoing review. A lot of people don't spend the time to refine those SOPs, either maybe some compliance changed with the state, or maybe the manufacturer changed something and found a huge change in the machine that can make your efficient more process or safer. So there's just a lot of, I would say especially with SOPs in manufacturing, they're always growing and changing is the main point underneath it all.
Kevin, anything to add there?
No, no, that was perfect. That was exactly what I was going to say.
Nice. All right, so let's move into a little bit about just the processes, extraction and infusion. You guys just mentioned like before it was just the CO2 process, and now there's a little bit more ways to extract, which could be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. We're dealing with, chemicals, processes. How do you ensure safety during an extraction process? And then how do you kind of like put that safety mechanism in an SOP?
So to be completely frank, it's pretty inherent when using these equipments, and especially getting the manufacturer SOPs, they're going to cover a lot of the dangerous situations and really overcome that. However, the things you really want to be thinking about are avoiding potentially dangerous situations and ensure, especially here's an easy one, a compliant space. So if you have a C1D1 room, any electronic device that goes into that room, whether it be a fixture that's installed, something in someone's pocket, something in someone's hands, something in someone's ears. If it's not a C1D1 compliant electronic device and it's used in that room, you're already out of compliance technically. So that's, whether the AirPods could create a spark or not, I don't think they're rated for a butane environment. So that's the whole idea. Avoiding potentially dangerous situations, proper machine operation and usage and maintenance, of course, ensuring that operators are aware of safety hazards, specific characteristics of the volatile solvents, and protocols in case of an error. So all solvents, all chemicals will have an MSDS.
Yeah.
Typical requirement, even in basic manufacturing, not even cannabis, is you got to post your MSDS book within distance of where those chemicals are being used in the same room. And doing so, if there is a spill or exposure, you have a document that says exactly what to do, what the risks are, what not to do, and what to do. So having all of that documentation ready and really making sure that the staff is aware of all these different hazards, not only will it help reduce errors and danger, but also increase the repeatability and the process efficiency of your operation, because now you're not dealing with downtime because of some error. There's definitely things that happen, there's worst case scenarios, but when you look at, like, for instance, a C1D1 environment, that's a little over the top for cannabis processing, to be completely honest. It's pretty much the most high classified environment. However, the idea is that in a worst case scenario, if all of that butane was released into that room for whatever reason, even though through manufacturer SOPs from the actual equipment itself and through your safeguards, maybe some weird catastrophic event happened, that room is designed to evacuate all of that solvent so that you don't have an explosion risk. So really just ensuring that everybody's aware and following the guidelines is the key there.
Nice. And we're seeing a bunch of cool products pop up, especially now in Jersey. First of all, we have, cannabis drinks now. There's so many different form factors that are being introduced. How, if you're in the manufacturing space, how can one balance that innovation and product development, that R&D side, but you still need to be in a very compliant, safe situation? Like, how do you kind of like walk that fine line?
It's a good question. Obviously, most people when they create their business plan, they're going to have sorry, my dog is fighting.
No problem. Do you think?
Come on, get in here. Sorry, he's just like standing behind the door, scratching and whining. One of the things that I like to do when it comes to helping a company go to market is, hey, how many new products do you want to create per quarter, per year? And then really understanding if there's any common veins through those products. So really a great way is to use similar equipment and or devices for formulation so that SOP modifications are more limited to temperatures, speeds, durations, and ingredients. So in other words, you're limiting the math. You're not writing a whole new SOP. You're just changing parameters to create a new product. And now all of a sudden you can innovate and make something new with the same equipment and a very similar SOP. Another one would be creating product sets that share similar bases and inputs that allow for variation in color, flavor, consistency, et cetera. So for instance, like a gummy mixture is a perfect example. If you have a standardized SOP for a given type of mix, you could then add different flavors in without changing the SOP, and every quarter come out with new products without actually changing that SOP. Building SOPs that have standardized components within a mixture So another little bit different than actually like gummies, but for instance, a base would be similar to mixing, let's just say, distillate with coconut oil. If you know that you're going to mix your distillate with coconut oil and create a batch that always has 50% potency, right? Your end product of that new subproduct is always 50%. It can then be plugged into SOPs at different points so that you're standardized in your process getting up to that point, and then going past that, it's really just modifying the end result. Um, and really, it's just planning, I would say, is the biggest thing.
Nice. Again, manufacturers, it just feels like you guys are like wicked chemists out there really chefing it up and creating some fire products. I want to jump to some questions we have from students before getting further in our planned Q&A. I have one here from Kara Ford. She has Jane Doe Bakery. Kara, how can one apply SOP structures to a baked goods brand and working with an MSA? Actually, that's a
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, no, I can take that. Actually, so when you say MSA managed service agreement, working with a brand within an existing, processor facility under their license, I think, at the end of the day, I have direct experience with this actually. At the end of the day, it's kind of like splitting them up, right? So obviously the base SOPs that like cover the facility and like how they use their equipment and produce their products, right? That's kind of on them. So trusting, or excuse me, finding a partner that you trust that follows the rules and maybe gently watching how they do their operation without being like, let me see your SOPs, right? There's always a little bit of social mechanics there. But after doing that, that's where your magic comes in, is your SOP, right? Under a managed service agreement. And actually, like if you kind of customize like a flavor or a certain formulation, if you will, obviously get legal advice to make sure that's protected. That's not my realm. But if you do that, sometimes that can put you in a commanding negotiation position actually on your MSA and potentially negotiate a little bit more from that, since you are the creator. You're doing a lot of the marketing and making sure the product's good, right? So I would say finding something that's unique to you that not everybody knows and dialing it in, maybe it's the ingredient, whatever, protecting it, and then putting that into place with that managed service agreement. And then if everybody plays well together and everybody's making money, well, that gives you a little bit of a negotiating tactic to maybe see if you can inch that up a little bit or create some more upside on your end. Because without that SOP, without that, they can't go out and copy it, right? Well, that takes away the magic, right? That's your magic. So that's how I'd answer that one. If there's any more specifics on that, you can ask or reach out to me, obviously. I think I'm able to say that, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
cool, cool.
One thing I'd like to add to that too is really your SOP would then start, because I think what she's asking is like, all right, well, if I'm not, you're probably not extracting, I'm assuming, right? So you're probably getting raw product from the people that you're working with under the MSA. So in which case your SOP would start at getting that material, and then you'd follow the same exact structure. You'd look at all the safeguards. Maybe you're not using any chemicals or volatile compounds because you're not extracting, but maybe you're using a hot oven, right? So write things about that oven, write things about the different wares that you're using in between. But really, it would be just less involved than an extracting SOP.
Mhm.
And we definitely want to see more baked goods enter the market. Um, Kara, I'll get to your follow-up in one. Actually, I'll do your follow-up and jump back. She says, can I bring my own SOPs for standardization?
Like amongst do you mean with like the actual people you're working with?
Yeah, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Yeah, you can try. Obviously, that's going to be up to the decision makers there, but I would definitely try to at least standardize some things, especially without giving up your recipe and the magic, like Kevin said. I think that that's important as well. But you definitely would want to have some commonality with how you guys are operating within the same facility.
Yeah, and one last thing with that too. One other way to do that is depending on who you're working with. If you're mixing it yourself, obviously you can go in there. I've had MSAs where we've went in another room and we've mixed something together ourselves. And we said, "Here's the magic powder," right? And then they go do what they need with it. If you can kind of dial that part in and get your quote mixture, then it's very easy from there to make an SOP, because it's like, hey, follow this thing you already know. Don't exceed this heat. Do it this way, whatever your steps are, right? But then you're protecting that IP as well. And you're removing the error, right? If that's your magic, why have somebody else do your magic, right? So,
And I'll top it off with, you guys know here, I have my pre-roll brand here in Jersey. One thing I'll also mention is that while, of course, not a baked good, I usually do licensing deals where I go work with different manufacturers to help create my pre-rolls. And generally, I come with my own SOPs. They might just be, all right, this is how I usually like my pre-rolls to be packed. This is how we usually do our pack outs to get the final product. These are my standards for THC percentages and terpenes and all this other stuff. And it is a communication, it is a conversation with whoever your partners are, because they're going to have ways to say, all right, well, we usually twist the pre-roll at the end here, but you like it tucked in. I think you get through some of those conversations so that you can either merge some of those SOPs, either create a new one that shows both of you guys working jointly, and then you're off to the races. So just a little extra there for you, Carousel. But we can't wait to see Jane Doe Bakery out in the market. I'm gonna jump to Elizabeth. You had a question. I'm gonna pull out this one because this is more pertaining to our conversation. How do you maintain regulatory compliance? Which is where I was gonna lead into when it comes to, having a manufacturing facility, having different SOPs. How do you make sure you're always up to standard with what the compliance rules are of the current state? How often does that change? How often do you have to monitor it? And more, I have a question to top on that. Some of us, we're small businesses, we have small budgets. Do you have to hire someone that just tackles compliance and SOPs, or is that something the owner operator probably needs to take on their belt if they're a little cash strapped?
Yeah, I can actually answer a little bit about that. I don't have it in front of me. It's been a minute. I apologize. So I have to double check, but there are some specific requirements within New Jersey for and they're loosely written. It's not necessarily like, do you have to hire this person with a certain type of background, but you have to have somebody designated to like quality and process control. I have to double check and look back at that just off the top of my head. I actually probably have it in my document somewhere, but like when I get to, in a minute, if I get there, I'll call it out. But there are a couple of things that you kind of have to do, right? But like you said, you don't necessarily have to hire, like if you're an owner operator, right, and you're confident that you can follow regulations and oversee this, you can assign yourself to that. That's obviously a big responsibility, right? There also is the kind of hybrid where there's like hiring somebody really good, there's doing it all by yourself, and there is that middle road, like using like an advisor or somebody that can, where you still do the main work, right? Like you don't want to run up a bill, but like you can still do the bulk of it, and maybe they're reviewing it, going over it, giving you like some pointers, right? They work just like legal on retainers. So sometimes you can get in for like a really, low cost in to always have somebody there to double check things if you are taking something on that would traditionally be a little bit over your head. But yeah, like I said, I can, when I call it out in a minute, I'll find it somewhere in my notes, but there, I believe it's quality control and process, or one more that there's a specific requirement on in New Jersey that somebody has to be designated to.
Yeah, and it's not like that person can only have that role, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken. It could be
Yeah.
you, could be your manager, but in all reality, as you scale, the amount of compliance needs grows because now you have more products, you have more SOPs, you have more processes, and as a result, you probably will want a compliance person at some point. But as to which when that is needed, that's going to be an internal decision based on budget, like Kevin said.
Yeah, and I'll give you a little tip too that I've recommended people do, and I've seen successful operators do. I like to consider that position compliance and labeling, right? Because like, check it out, compliance, like they're not gonna, a compliance person isn't gonna be standing with the clipboard overlooking, like, right? If they're compliance and labeling, you can get somebody that still does some physical work for you guys, gets everything out the door, gets it packaged, printed. It is a higher level job too, but it doesn't cost you that much to be a high level job. Like it's the middle of the road employee that wants to build their career in cannabis and they're sharp, right? That's a good one because then during the times that they're not overseeing those compliance items, right, they can do the packaging and labeling, or at least lead the packaging and labeling team to make sure that the ones under them that may be some of the lower paid labor are following the right directions and nothing's getting out the door wrong.
And that's an important point right there. I just want to piggyback off of, when it comes to the labeling, we have a few things in here about that. The labeling is your final product. That's the thing that's going out to the market. That's the thing that's being judged. That's all of that. So having that person that's overseeing the labeling, like Kevin said, I think is a really smart point, because tying that to your compliance person, you're making sure that everything that enters the market goes through their eyes and is under their oversight, and they should be the most familiar person with the regs.
Yeah, makes sense. And it's a perfect segue into labeling. But before we get there, just had a question like from what you guys experience from inception, from getting your application, and how long does it usually take a manufacturer to kind of like come online? Let's say you just have all your things in place. You have your equipment, you have funding, you have all those things. What are the different variations we see? Because one thing I like to do is really give people a realistic idea of
Mhm.
what and how long it takes to launch something. So give us like maybe small scale, big scale, how long you've seen people take to open and set up shop.
Hmm. I w- that is a range, right? Here's the
Big
thing.
range.
I would say if you're really confident that you're going to get the license and you already have your I'll tell you the biggest thing I've seen hold up that whole entire process is the real estate
They
until you
always.
have something signed, right? But like assuming you have your real estate, you have, excuse me, you have your equipment, you have your funding, it could be very easy, right? Down to, because like at the end of the day, like you'll know going in how many applications and how quickly the state's approving manufacturing applications at a state level. That'll be kind of common knowledge, right? It's that local AHJ, the locality that really can put a ding in that, right? So if you know your state's good and you know you have all your pieces, your labs design, your funding and everything like that, really, I'm kind of guiding you to the way to answer that. The way to answer that is just really dial in and focus on your local municipality. If they're giving licenses away in a couple of weeks, your timeline could be as quick as a couple of weeks until construction starts, right? That's where it's almost impossible to estimate. Are you building from the ground up? Are you going into an existing infrastructure, right? That part's nearly impossible. But taking that out of the equation, yeah, it could be anywhere from a week to like multiple months. So to reiterate, focus the local because you shouldn't be going into an application for manufacture at a state level being like, I don't know if they're going to approve 100 tomorrow or one in 10 years. I hope you've done the due diligence there, right? You probably have. And again, you like you Precious said, if you have all your other things in place, because like a couple quick hit points, right? Usually takes about 6 weeks to get a lab design and a space design, then another 6 to 8 weeks for MEPs, then another handful of weeks for back and forth, and then maybe approvals, right, from the locality, and then getting your contractor scheduled, right? So again, taking that out, that could be as long as, whatever. But actually, another thing there when I say focus in on the municipality, not only from a licensing standpoint on what they're doing, but really try to understand. And this may just take some phone calls and asking people, this is where you get creative, but understanding how long the approvals take. Like, for example, I worked in a city one time where I was involved in a license where I knew damn well that literally getting DTE out to run power and then getting that guy out to approve the power was 14 months. There's nothing you're doing about it. I knew. So no matter what your timeline is, you're 14 months right there. So that's where you're going to really get your answer there and be ahead of the curve is getting it from the local, digging in locally and figuring those little things out that I just said.
Amen.
To listen, once you wrap up the question, once you wrap up an answer with the follow-up amen, that means that what is said is tried and
Yeah.
true. But no, I asked that because, Jersey, we're starting to see more manufacturers come online, each having varying times, and just really want to give some realistic stats to our students. So we were just talking about packaging and labeling, and you guys also mentioned like part of manufacturing, which I know this license type exists out in Connecticut where a lot of their job is really just to like pack out, get all things to finish goods, finished products, and get it out the door to retailers. How can you prevent like major mislabeling errors when it comes to your SOPs?
So all SOPs should contain specific packaging and labeling requirements as set forward by the state. So section 13 of it's called Cannabis Item Labeling Requirements. In
Mhm.
my opinion, I was trying to summarize these things, but it's really, there's a lot in there. So there's the processing of cannabis and cannabis products. There's cannabis item packaging requirements. There's cannabis item labeling requirements. There's tax stamp and tracking. There's prohibitions, and there's the universal symbol.
Yeah.
So as long as you're really honed in on that section 13, right, specifically 1 through 6, those are really, that would be the way to prevent the labeling errors is being compliant with that. And like Kevin said before, really having your the same person that's overseeing compliance for the facility should also be looking at the labeling. Because like I said before, that's what's going out to the market. So really, it's complying, it's performing verification and double checking, double checking all these things. And then
Internal
considering,
audits.
yeah. Another
Yeah.
thing that the state I saw put in there is a consideration of sustainable alternatives to single-use plastic packaging is another thing that they're looking at. So just another thing to throw in for the labeling and packaging. But I'm really,
Getting
it's
ahead
all,
of it.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, right? It's really just understanding that the staff is fully trained and understands the importance, because in all reality, it's that label is the final step. So if it gets screwed up at that point, that could get you into some hot water with the state pretty quickly.
Yeah, we've
Yeah,
seen
and you know
recall.
what, Precious, too, one thing too, just because actually it covers another one of your questions. It was like kind of a 2-for-1.
Yeah.
That one that I was going to answer after kind of directly addresses that as well. I was going to just give a couple tips for somebody to write down. It's really good to embed examples directly into your SOPs or work instructions, and those examples can be either directly from the state. Some of the states will post those, and they can also be internal and external, right? Maybe you're new to making edibles, so you don't have one. So post a big brand that you know darn well has a verified packaging and labeling on theirs, right? Put that as an example, or internally put a perfect example from your compliance head guy, right? Embed those as images and examples directly on that. You can also, going back to hiring that packaging and compliance and labeling person, that person usually, if you get a really organized person, you can have them be very structured in doing pre-approved or templated files for various types of labels, pre-rolls, this, that, and the other, where everything stays the same. You're just changing branding. And then, yeah, that's just a couple pointers there, I'd say.
Yeah,
And one thing,
auditing regularly too, and having people actually checking against these regs. The auditing and training regularly is really important. You need that feedback loop.
Yeah.
yeah, and you guys have just reminded me something that I think is tried and true when it comes to SOPs. You're really regurgitating what is written there in the regs, right? But
Mhm.
showing how you would then like expand on it. If the reg
Yeah.
says, make sure you color the circle blue, you're gonna say, all right, I'm gonna get a blue crayon. We're gonna draw the circle and then we're gonna color it blue. So
Mhm.
I like to remind people that you're literally just regurgitating what's already there in law and expanding on it and putting it into, like you said, work instruction into real practice.
Mhm.
This has been a great conversation. We only have 15 minutes left, so I probably won't get to all the rest of my questions. Again, anyone, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A box, and we'll get into some. Let's go into actually quality assurance and control, because this is an important part of the industry. Like Jersey has had recalls before. We've seen recalls happen in other states that are connected either to a manufacturer or cultivation facility. Um, how do you make sure that you are operating or practicing QA/QC protocols so that you're having consistent safety and quality? Because yes, you can write about it, but like, are you the owner that has to like look over every process, make sure the step, there's like taste testing at the end? Sometimes I remember experiencing buying a 10 pack, maybe 5 milligram gummy situation. And I trust me, you guys know me. I'm a tried and true consumer. There was one gummy in there that I know just was not a 5 milligram. I can tell you, I will bet my left toe that was not a 5 milligram gummy. So, like, how do you prevent that? Like, how do you make sure there's just consistency and quality in your facility and then written out in your SOP?
So it's a tough one because obviously, there's multiple people working, and that's really the downfall, right? You can't see every little gummy. So it's really, following those SOPs, ensuring that your staff is also being tested on those SOPs, routine batch testing. So batch testing, if you're in a GMP environment, you actually have to test and I think, if I'm not mistaken, Kevin, you had mentioned that there's now GMP language. I saw that it said good
Yeah,
manufacturing.
Jersey's ahead of it a little bit more. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so GMP is, it's not this mystical beast that some people paint it to be, but really one of the biggest things is testing at every material change. So if you're getting the biomass and then you're extracting it, obviously you're going to have a test result from the biomass, but when you change its form into an extract, you need to test it at that point. and you need to test it. Really, you should be testing for contaminants as well. A lot of people don't do this because they don't have the budget or the internal capability. A great way to kind of overcome that is to have in-house testing. I'm not sure, I don't think it's fully a requirement, but you can use external testing, but it does become very costly. So a really good way to get ahead of the curve, it's expensive, is to actually put a QA/QC room within your facility that has an HPLC in it and someone that knows how to operate it with the proper methods so that you can test your product as it goes through the process. Once you've got really good SOPs and you're dialed in, final product testing is really obviously the bee's knees and the whole point of this, right? But really, you got to test for those contaminants, potency, and general composition. And unfortunately, there's going to be things that happen once they reach the market. It does happen, unfortunately, especially the gummy thing being inconsistencies that usually arise from a poor mixture. So really, if you had seen that, hey, I have this product line that has some variability, you need to go back and change your manufacturing SOP to increase your product's consistency, because clearly it wasn't consistent to begin with. So really, quality QA/QC is an internal thing. It's something that obviously the state requires, but there's different levels of it based on budget, is really what I would say there. Kevin, do you have any?
Yeah, and one more thing too, like this shows you where an SOP and being detailed can help you prevent that. You could have a table that's slightly uneven, and you could have a scale on that table. You could also have a really bad scale or a really good scale, but maybe it's uneven. And you didn't have in your SOP that the operator, before doing a batch, should balance the little legs. Couldn't think of the name. The little legs in the bottom of a scale. You didn't have that in your SOP. So every day they just went in there and it gets bumped and moved around and they're weighing stuff. And that difference in the API, the distillate, the rosin, whatever you're making your gummies with, all of a sudden that goes into a mixture that causes inconsistency. So going back to when we talk about choosing the right equipment, but also like adding the work instructions with the specific equipment. Another one, maybe you didn't dictate the scale, and the scale goes out so many characters or whatever. Yeah, but hey, somebody in a pinch, the scale breaks and they run up to Home Depot and buy a scale that doesn't have that accuracy, and you're weighing crap out horribly for the next until somebody notices it, right? If you would have said, hey, this is the type of scale or comparable in your SOP, that mistake wouldn't have happened.
And something to add to that, thank you for bringing that up, Kevin. Calibration of your equipment.
Yes.
So scales are notoriously, they go out of whack over time. They're sensitive to electronics. If you have a magnet near your scale, that'll affect its reading. So having good SOPs around, just like Kevin said, leveling the scale. How often is it calibrated? Do we calibrate it every week? Do we calibrate it every month? Do we have two scales to test against? So we have two answers, because really scales, like weighing your actual mass of your products, especially when you're talking about small things, it becomes incredibly important. And like Kevin said, I would say that is probably the biggest way that people make mistakes. Scales.
And you were mentioning GMP. This is kind of off topic, but I would love like a super brief explanation of it, because it is something that Jersey doesn't necessarily require, but we're seeing a lot of people try to work towards being GMP certified. All feel like it makes for, I don't know, a better business operation. Can you just talk to us a little bit about it and what you're seeing in the manufacturing space?
Absolutely. So really the main pieces of GMP are the people, the premises, the processes, and the products, and obviously QA/QC. So really those are your 4 or 5 pillars, however many that is. And ensuring QA/QC at every step of the process, that's a major piece of GMP. Another is that all pieces of equipment used within that process cannot pose harm or contamination to that product that's in it. So a good example of that would be threads on a threaded fitting. Could material from a previous batch get inside of threads of some, let's just say we have a mixing vessel, right? And there's a gauge that's threaded into the top of it. If you guys haven't done a good audit on to make sure that those threads can't hold material or contaminants from a previous batch, that could be a GMP issue. So it's a lot of things like that. Very clear SOPs that are very well written. That's another big piece. The actual people that are involved, the training mechanisms. So for GMP documentation, usually there's an IQ, OQ, PQ document. That's installation qualification, operational qualification, and
Process qualification.
Personnel qualifications.
Personnel.
So those documents typically get maintained. So for instance, if we were as a manufacturer coming in to install, let's say, a piece of distillation equipment into a GMP facility, there would be IQ documentation that the actual people installing the piece of equipment have to sign and check off all the boxes on. And then the operation qualification is making sure that the machine operates to manufacturer spec. And then the third would be actually the personnel qualification. Hey, we effectively trained these people. Here's all the check boxes signed by the proper personnel. Those documents, you can find templates online for them. But essentially those pieces, along with the QA/QC, and ensuring that none of those pieces of equipment can contaminate your material, are really the key pieces of GMP.
Nice. Thanks for that breakdown. So as we wrap up, because this has been such like a wealth of information, I feel like I know a lot now of the backstory when it comes to just how manufacturers or you build those facilities to be successful. Some of my last questions are just about like continuous improvement and training. So how does one, once you're finally like in the game, you're stood up, things change. You mentioned you could do something one way and change. There's audits. You mentioned auditing yourself frequently. What is the most effective way to make sure that your staff is trained up, that your SOPs are routinely being updated, you're building continuous, framework that makes it so that you can operate efficiently? Like, how do you just keep the ship going, being that there's so many things that can change at any given time?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So a couple things I would say. First, obviously, extremely effective training is extremely important, and a lot of people forget about it. So, what makes something effective, in my opinion, it's doing virtual training first, like, hey, getting them the document, let them self-review, right? Followed by maybe some in-person module. You always want to do that, right, with your team. But then an actual physical walkthrough, right? And I don't think it's bad to have certain people on certain teams, even if they're not directly directly the authority on it. If they in any way, shape, or form cross with them, they should also they shouldn't just understand the SOPs as part of their process, right? So I think like physical walkthrough and cross training for even just events outside of their job function. With that said, how can you actually take that and build continuous improvement into it? Definitely, if you go back to like when I set up top with the essentials and the SOPs, we talked about date and revision history. Well, I mentioned like a frequency for review. Hey, when should we re-review this, right? You should have a schedule review and update plan over a defined period for certain SOPs. There might be different time ranges depending on the SOP. That's normal, right? And then I would say number two would be like scheduled training updates and retainment sessions. So even after the person is trained, you don't necessarily have to, maybe you're not training them on an update because it didn't update, but just kind of a refresher like, hey, how's this been working, right? And it's also an opportunity to get a feedback loop. Sometimes, right, if you have a pretty big operation, you have a lot going on, sometimes honestly obtaining a third party assistance to maybe do a review and help, or like Mike and I, we do operational efficiency and operational oversight reviews all the time, and some of that stuff we're pretty much building continuous improvement into their SOPs. People hire us to do that. I definitely like to assign leads also to certain things, right? Just kind of like you do if you have a lot of people on one team, you're going to break them up into leads. And oh, another one too. I think this is really important to do this in two ways. I think you should always have a formal change request procedure where your employees know what to do. Because sometimes you're like, oh, I have this thing that I want to remind them, and then life happens and you never say the thing, right? If you have a formal process to actually like request review or something of that nature on there, I think that's good. But don't forget to maybe make an anonymous one. And I say that because you'd be surprised frequently. A lot of the mistakes that are found in SOPs are found from the hardworking operators that work for you. They're often not caught by management in a lot of cases. And depending on the environment or how new the employee is, maybe they feel uncomfortable bringing that up to management. So giving them an anonymous submission medium that would allow them to feel comfortable to make suggestions and things of that nature, I think would be great. And then the last one would just be KPIs, right? You should know, hey, I want this type of output, be reasonable. But if you're not hitting that reasonable output, something needs to change in your SOP. So setting a KPI to know when you're falling short.
Yep.
Yeah.
And just so you guys know, the state does not require you to update your SOPs over any certain period of time. They do require the 3-year review. But for different ISO standards and different types of, if you're trying to go for higher accreditation, they may require annual reviews. So we typically recommend at least a 12-month review. Obviously, like Kevin said, if there's any change to your process, you should be altering your SOP. And also, like he said, these operators, they also have a lot of really good ideas. So hearing them and listening to them, I think is a really key piece to growing your efficiency and just your overall work environment.
No, that's great. I think the anonymous point literally hit it on the head. I appreciate you both for coming in and just dropping. I wouldn't even call these gems. I would call these caves of jewels inside because like you really don't get this high level insight into the world of manufacturing on your Tuesday night at 6. So I appreciate you both and I appreciate everyone for joining and sticking with us and getting all this. All of this will be posted on our YouTube, on our CTA platform, and then we'll also send it out so that anybody missed it, they can watch it. One question for you, Kevin, because I asked every instructor this, what is the benefit of taking your course here with the CTA for folks who are just trying to get into the manufacturing space?
Yeah, you mean like what benefit is it for them?
Yeah, taking your
Yeah.
course.
Oh, got you. Yeah, I would say, I mean, the biggest one, obviously, we went through a lot, but I mean, look, why it's, in my opinion, so important is because, as you can see, a lot of things could go wrong. Why is it a benefit? Because I don't think a lot of people think this way. That's why people like, reach out to us and we do what we do is because a lot of people that are writing SOPs are literally, like I said earlier, writing them to be extremely vague and just to pass their license and things of that nature. They're not learning this type of stuff. Like I didn't read this on Google before the call. I didn't like learn this yesterday. I've learned this over years. So as you notice in the way that we answer our questions, in my opinion, you get a leg up over the competitors to never have a hiccup, to stay in compliance, but also learn how to think a little bit differently and actually make sure that the SOPs are being followed to put out a good final product, which is the ultimate goal.
Yeah, I appreciate Mike. Anything to add on and why it's important to read up on this?
I would say our section is pretty unique because we came from the manufacturer side. So I think like you had said, the insight that we really put into our course here was that. And I think that that is something that you don't normally get. So I do think it's really important. And I forgot to mention something earlier.
Yeah.
Put pictures in your SOPs.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention that, but I'll tell you, man, it's one of the most important things because you can just show a picture of what you're trying to explain. Obviously, you want to detail it out in writing as well, but pictures are huge. So, but yeah, no, I think our course is good. I honestly love what you guys have done. I think every state should do it. It's wonderful.
I appreciate you guys. And Kevin dropped his information there. We will also send it out. You guys are free to reach out to Kevin and Mike if you need further guidance, even consulting if you're there. I appreciate everyone for joining us. And again, thank you. I will get everybody back here Tuesday night. It's been so real. Shout out to the triple OGs for joining us. You can see why they are dubbed so. So catch us on our next Q&As. We will be going into a little bit about delivery next. So excited to be there. All right, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.